Yes, okay, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Balwant Singh Mehta and welcome you all on the talk series on India's state of employment organized by Center for Work and Welfare at IMPRI, New Delhi, and with partnership with Counterview, our media partner. As you know, the novel coronavirus disease pandemic has destroyed the livelihood and employment of millions of people across the world. There are various reports and surveys estimates of huge job losses, particularly in informal sector and temporary nature of work in services and industrial sector, particularly in Asian countries like India, where the majority of the worker engaged in informal sector and informal employment, that is around 81% and around 90% in 2018-19. With the increasing level of urbanization and continuum of migration from rural to urban area, the urban informalization within the formal sector has expanded over the years. And we have seen during the pandemic period how the migration has created, how this informal sector and migration has really visible during the problem of migration in the informal sector visible during the COVID-19. So this really worrying the policy makers and other stakeholders in these countries, particularly in India. In this context, the experts' insight on present employment situation and future policy direction is most important. So we are fortunate that today we have with us one of the eminent experts in employment issues, Professor Arup Mitra, who is currently Professor and Dean of South Asian University, Delhi. He has more than 3 decades of experience. We all have learned so much from him, and most of our work is also motivated by his contribution. So first, let me briefly introduce Professor Arup Mitra. Before joining South Asian University, he worked as a professor of economics at Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi, and also Director General, National Institute of Labor Economics Research and Development, an autonomous organization attached to NITI Aayog. He completed his MA, MPhil, and PhD from Delhi School of Economics and postdoctoral from Northwestern University, USA. He has also worked as a consultant to numerous international organizations as a visiting professor with several international universities. He was awarded by the Indian Economic Society Mahalanobis Memorial Gold Medal for his outstanding contribution to quantitative economics. He has been a member of a several expert committee. His book on inclusive growth, employment, and well-being, published by Springer, has received Professor S.R. Sen Best Book Award. He has published more than 100 articles in dozens of top journals such as World Development, APW, and others, and published 10 books from reputed publishing houses such as Springer, Cambridge University Press, Orient Blacksman, etc. This speaks about the quality of research work he has done over the last 3 decades. Today's talk of Professor Mitra will focus on employment challenges, current employment challenges, and way forward. And today we have, after the talk, we have with us for the discussion, we have Professor Bharat Singh from Delhi University, Dr. Manorama Bakshi, Senior Advisor, Tata Trust, Dr. Reena Kumari from Lalit Narayan Mithila University, and Dr. Arjun Kumar, Director IMPRI. Now, without any further ado, I will request Professor Mitra for his special talk. Thank you, sir, and welcome.
Good afternoon. This is great pleasure on my part to share my ideas and thoughts on the employment challenges in India. I have a brief presentation to make, so let me share my screen with you. Let me begin by defining what exactly I mean by employment problem. I'm not referring to the concept called unemployment problem, rather employment problem. Now, employment problem, it includes the open unemployment rate as well as the informal sector employment rate. So it's much bigger than what we mean by unemployment. There are many individuals who cannot afford to remain unemployed for long. So they get into petty activities, residually get absorbed in marginal activities and continue to work there with meager earnings. So the informal sector employment or the set of working poor would be more important rather than referring to those who are openly unemployed. Also, it is important to make a distinction between informal sector employment and informal employment. As you know, within the formal sector, the informalization has been taking place. Right after the mid-80s, I think particularly after the 90s, the informalization process has been going on within the formal sector. This is primarily to reduce the wage cost within the formal sector. There are many mechanisms through which these informalization processes have been introduced. The intermediaries, the labor intermediaries have been hired significantly, and they have introduced this contractualization process, etc. When we are referring to this term informal employment, we would obviously refer to those who are engaged in small units like informal sector, and also those who are in the formal sector in informal capacity. We may equate them because in spite of working in the formal sector, they are as vulnerable as the informal sector are in terms of lack of safety net and many other benefits. So, given this background, let me just brief sort of about the 2017-18 periodic labor force survey data. That what we get to see here, that unemployment rate rose significantly, and everyone was worried that what happened, the unemployment rate compared to the previous NSS rounds had shot up. Of course, we get to see that the educational attainment improved, and the urbanization level also increased. So this sort of, it sounded at the back of our mind that maybe Indian economy is maturing. It is attaining the maturing stage, and that is the reason why the open unemployment is also rising along with educational attainments. What it means that people now can afford to remain unemployed for some time and look for better jobs. Similarly, when people have migrated to the urban space with higher levels of education, they are looking for jobs of their desirable status, and that is the reason why the unemployment rate has increased. So nothing to worry about the rise in the unemployment rate. Rather, it could be a sort of silver lining, and it could be indicating the maturing stage of the economy. And along with the rise in the unemployment rate, we could also see that the incidence of informal sector employment had declined. So that strengthened our interpretation that yes, the economy was maturing. So people needn't have to be pushed into the low productivity residual sector activities. Rather, they could afford to wait to receive better jobs. So that was one major feature which emerged from 2017-18 periodic labor force survey data. Also, in terms of our quantitative exercises, we are able to see that there are considerable overlaps between the informal sector employment, migration, and rural poverty. If you look into some of these theoretical models by Harris-Todaro and Todaro, you would find that they largely talked about the rise in incidence of rural poverty, which will encourage people or motivated people to migrate to the urban space. And as they migrate to the urban space, obviously there may be a shortage of labor demand. So the mismatch between the labor demand and labor supply may result in a residual sector employment in the informal sector. They may be looking for better jobs, they may be looking for jobs in the high productivity activities, but the labor demand in the high productivity activities may not match with the quality of labor which has migrated to the urban space. So that is the reason why they are then working in the informal sector as self-employed workers or casual workers, etc. Because the high productivity segment within the urban space will always demand for highly skilled labor force. Whereas the people who have migrated from the rural space may not actually be in a position to cope up with those requirements. And we tried to sort of model this exercise in the Harris-Todaro framework, and we tried to see what is the association between urban poverty and rural poverty. Because those some of those theoretical underpinnings had suggested that as people move from the rural space to the urban space, they get residually absorbed in low productivity activities, and eventually they transfer rural poverty to the urban space. So urban poverty is nothing but a spillover of rural poverty. So many of the policy recommendations which had come up during the 70s and 80s had talked about the implementation of rural development programs on a significant scale. And their idea was that if rural development programs, anti-poverty programs are implemented with all sincerity, then automatically urban poverty will be taken care of. So in the backdrop of that, when we were trying to work out the elasticity of urban poverty with respect to rural poverty, what we found that the magnitude was extremely low. It was only about 0.1. What it means that as rural poverty increases, it will definitely raise the incidence of urban poverty, but only to a nominal extent. So rural poverty adds to urban poverty only at the margin. Well, so two implications can be drawn. One is that many rural poor cannot afford to migrate to the urban space because migration is associated with a cost, and many rural poor may not actually afford that cost, and hence they are not able to migrate to the urban space. Also, it means that many of the urban poor have already been residing in the urban space for a very long time. Hence, you cannot interpret the entire stock of urban poverty merely in terms of rural flow or the flow of migration from the rural to the urban space. And the flow is taking place, so there is a statistically significant relationship between rural poverty and urban poverty, but the entire stock of urban poverty cannot be rationalized, cannot be explained merely in terms of rural poverty. So there are, even if you implement the rural development programs and anti-poverty programs with all sincerity, there are many urban poor who have lost their contacts with the rural space, and hence they may not be in a position to go back to the rural areas and take advantage of this situation. Hence, it was felt very strongly that the urban anti-poverty programs should also be implemented. So like NREGA, people had also mentioned that an urban counterpart of the NREGA should be introduced. And these NREGA programs merely should not focus on the public distribution system, etc. Rather, it should try to focus on the safety net in the informal sector, implementation of minimum wages, not only in the formal, also in the informal sector, and for those who are in informal employment, and also some kind of employment insurance or employment security to be provided. As you know, the National Commission on Unorganized Sector Enterprises was set up, and it had come up with a large number of recommendations. And so all this basically followed from this viewpoint that urban poverty is not just the spillover of rural poverty. Urban poverty has been existing in the urban space for a very, very long time. Now, if you look at the urban jobs, particularly in the informal sector, is it true that the informal sector jobs comprise only low productivity activities? No, not necessarily they comprise only low productivity activities. Some of the units are quite productive. In fact, some of the units in the urban space, they decide to remain small so that they are able to avoid the tax burdens, etc. So not necessarily all the small units are characterized by low productivity. In fact, we have a lot of evidence that even within the informal sector, people are able to experience upward mobility. Maybe a person had joined as a sort of helper in a tea shop. Now, after decades, perhaps he's owning a tea stall. So those kinds of mobility, anecdotal evidence is available. Also, the informal sector is seen to have strong linkages with the formal sector. So many of the development economists then had suggested that if the informal sector has strong linkages with the formal sector in terms of business subcontracting, in terms of ancillarization, etc., then what is the worry? If the formal sector is growing and if the formal sector is connected to the rest of the world, then automatically the informal sector workers would also benefit, because the business contract and ancillarization, etc., all will take place through these linkages. But again, in terms of our research, what we have seen that the intermediary class is extremely large, and because of this operation of the middlemen, the profits get squeezed, and even when the formal sector is in a position to pay the minimum wages, etc., for the informal sector workers, they do not actually get paid. It's primarily expropriated by the labor intermediaries. Now, as you look at the rural sector, poverty exists in the agriculture sector and also in the rural non-farm sector. In agriculture sector, as you know, because of climatic changes, because of shortage of water, the cultivation pattern is changing very much. The cropping pattern has also changed. The number of times that the crops are cultivated, that has also reduced significantly. So employment possibilities are shrinking tremendously. So livelihood opportunities are shrinking, and people are being pushed out of the agriculture, either to the rural non-farm sector or to the urban space. Now, in the rural non-farm sector, we are able to see two kinds of activities that are organized. One is responding to demand-induced sort of actions. So we call them as demand-induced activities. And the other kind of activities primarily fall into the domain of what we call as residual sector activities. So these residual sector activities would include your vegetable vendors and tea stall operators, etc., even in the rural space. And during the 90s and 2000s, you get to see there has been a huge proliferation of such residual type of activities in the rural space. Not only in the urban space, also in the rural space. And that is how many of these rural areas are now being converted into the urban space. So all of a sudden you get to see 2,500 census towns emerged in 2011. The government of India doesn't recognize them as urban space because they do not have any urban local bodies. But in terms of activities, etc., you are able to see that they are no more agriculture dominated. They are primarily dominated by non-farm sector activities. So by the definition, they have all been converted into the urban space. But because they do not have an urban local body, they are called as census towns and not statutory towns. And these census towns, unfortunately, are not able to get a proper share of the urban investment. And hence, they are not able to invest on creation of livelihood opportunities or creation of infrastructure, etc. So these people tend to get absorbed in low productivity activities. Now, as you come to the urban space, you are able to see that large cities vis-a-vis the medium-sized and small towns exist simultaneously. And there are about 50 and odd, as per 2011 census, million plus cities, and more than 400 class 1 cities. So these class 1, each of these class 1 cities would have more than 100,000 population. And in terms of our urban economics literature, what we have seen that these large cities are relatively better off compared to the small towns or medium-sized towns. The concentration of economic activities, the concentration of population, the concentration of market, it tends to reduce the cost of operation. At the same time, it adds to productivity growth. So what you are able to see that often we have read in the textbook that concentration is a bad word. But the urban economists would suggest that no, concentration also has a positive side. Because of concentration of activities, you are able to share the cost, and hence your cost of operation for each of the firms will be reduced and the productivity growth will be much higher. So with same amount of resources, if you are located in a large city, your productive performance will be much better compared to a firm which is located in a small town and operating with the same amount of resources. And then further, the urban economists argue that because of this productivity growth, a part of this productivity rise is also transferred to the workers. So the workers in large cities for the same activity will get higher wages compared to their counterparts in small towns or medium-sized towns. Now, given this situation, we may like to visit the migration rates from the rural to the urban areas. If you calculate the rural to urban, all urban area migration rate, in the Indian context, these rates are not really very significant. They are very, very moderate. And it comes as a big surprise because if you look into the history of most of the present day developed nations, you would find that huge amount of migration had taken place during the 19th century and early 20th century. But that is not happening in the Indian context. So people start wondering that why Lewis model is not working. Now, if you recalculate the migration rate, not as a percentage of total urban population, but as a percentage of total city population, that is the pace of migration from rural to large cities, then you would find that the migration rate is quite spectacular. It is quite significant. So the migrants are quite rational. They know that if they travel to the large cities, then they will benefit more. For the same activity, they will be able to get higher wages because the productivity levels in the large cities are much higher. And also the search cost, the job search cost will be very less. And the information pertaining to the urban job market can be accessed easily. Now, if you look at, if you pose this question, that how do the migrants, the illiterate migrants, the unskilled migrants, they access information about the urban job market? It is primarily through your caste kinship bonds and through all informal bonds and informal networks. So networks are very important, but they do not have access to formal networks. It is through the informal channels, the information flow from the urban space to the rural areas. So they are sure about their recruitment, and after receiving the information, they migrate to the urban space. So it is not really true that what we had read, that the urban bright lights would attract the rural lads to migrate to the urban space. So they are very well informed and they are very rational in making their decisions. Now, when you look at the duration of migration and poverty, yes, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that those who have migrated 10 years back, 15 years back, and have been continuously staying in the urban space for long, they have been successful in reducing their poverty. I'm not saying that they have completely escaped poverty, but definitely the intensity of poverty has declined, and there is a negative relationship between the incidence of poverty and the duration of migration. Also, migration and poverty tends to vary according to the ethnic background. Not necessarily everyone will experience upward mobility to the same extent. People of certain ethnic backgrounds are able to experience much rapid upward mobility. And also another important point which comes up, that is the contribution of these migrant households, these low-income households, to city growth and the value addition that the city is creating. In fact, Yujiro Hayami and others had done a very interesting study in the context of Delhi, waste collectors. That was their case study. And what through the income expenditure approach, they worked out the amount of value addition that the waste collectors are creating. In other words, if the government had to appoint waste collectors and had to pay wages, then it would have been it would have involved enormous amount of cost for the government. On the other hand, the waste collectors were creating so much value addition at such a low cost. And in relation to the value addition that they were creating, the amount of income that they were able to earn was extremely meager. And that is the reason why this study had recommended that the government should be providing infrastructural support and all kinds of other supportive facilities to these migrants. So all that I'm trying to argue, that exclusionary urbanization is something not acceptable. It's not that you demolish the slums and you send them back, or you implement such an urban policy so that the migrants are discouraged and they are bound to go back to the rural space. This is something not acceptable. They are creating a lot of value addition, and accordingly they should be paid, and they should also be accommodated within the urban space. Now, two other important things I wanted to highlight in the present context, that if you look at the periodic labor force survey data, the sustainable livelihood opportunities are declining significantly. Interestingly, they have given you information for the same household for 4 different sub-rounds within a given year. So if you track one particular household and you try to see that what this particular household is doing over the four sub-rounds, you would be surprised to note that a significant percentage of the households and their members are not in a position to sustain their livelihood. They are changing from one livelihood to another livelihood as time passes by. So that what it tries to indicate that because of lack of certain infrastructural facilities in the rural space and also in the urban informal sector, they are being forced to change their occupation from time and again. And another important point that emerges, that they are not, even at a given point in time, they are not able to focus on a single activity. They are getting into multiple sources of livelihood, because the amount of income that they earn from one particular activity is not sufficient to give them the minimum subsistence level of living. So that is why they are accessing multiple sources of livelihood even at a given point of time. Let's say one principal status job, another subsidiary status job, or 2-3 subsidiary status jobs. A significant percentage of the population are sort of doing such kind of activities. Now, in the backdrop of this, now you get to see that the recent pandemic occurred, lockdown was announced, and reverse migration took place. Many people were forced to leave the cities because they did not have enough income to pay the rents and to sustain their consumption. So they thought it would be advisable to go back to the rural space, at least where they have their own land. And then they would look for sort of alternative avenues, alternative employment opportunities. As a result, what happened? The urban unemployment rate declined naturally. So this is nothing to be sort of happy about. The urban unemployment rate declined because people had left the urban space and they had gone back to the rural space. On the other hand, the rural unemployment rate rose tremendously. It came up to about 24%, then declined to 17%, and then slowly it decelerated. But again, we should not be feeling happy about this decline in the rural unemployment rate. Because what had happened, the same activity in the rural space was being shared by a large number of individuals. In other words, there was a lot of disguised unemployment. What was being performed by 2 individuals is now being performed by 4 individuals. Because after the migrants returned to their rural home, after 1 week, there were no more guests. They had to strive hard with the other brothers. So the same occupation was shared by large number of individuals. So there was no open unemployment. So open unemployment was declining, but we must understand that this open unemployment was, this decline was not really a silver lining. Rather, the activity was shared by many, so income was also shared by many. So per capita income was declining tremendously. And if there is a consumption expenditure survey conducted during this time, we will be able to see that in what way it had actually impacted on the consumption expenditure of the individuals. Anyway, I do not want to get into the details. As you know, the details were flashed in various platforms. Now we should talk about the future strategies. I'm using this term opportunity, though I should not be using this term opportunity. It is pandemic and it is lockdown and it is severe stress on livelihood. But still, from the positive side, I'm saying let us take this opportunity to revive the economy. We have always been talking about the productivity growth in the rural non-farm sector. But the rural non-farm sector never emerged as a strong pillar in the Indian context. Ever since the Independence Day, we have been saying that rural industrialization must pick up, but that never happened, except in a few pockets of Maharashtra and Gujarat. So now I think it is the opportunity that the government should take, and we should, the investors, the private investors should also take, to invest in the rural economy significantly, so this strategy of rural industrialization can be implemented to a significant extent. And a lot of productive employment opportunities can be provided to those who have gone back from the urban space to the rural space, and also to those who are disguisedly working in the agricultural sector. They should at least be able to leave the agriculture sector to fewer hands and should be in a position to move into the rural non-farm sector in a significant manner. And the last point relates to your, again, revival of the informal sector, urban informal sector workers. We should now think of more productive strategies for enhancing the productivity growth of the workers in the informal sector, to provide them certain prerequisites, to provide them certain infrastructural benefit. For example, there has always been a problem about space, that where should they run their business. So if the government is able to provide them some kind of land ownership, perhaps they will be able to make their investment on housing, investment on their shops, So if the land tenure is very important in the urban context. Land tenure was important in the rural context. Now we are saying that this ownership right in the urban context is also very important. Implementation of minimum wage, etc., that is important. I'm not denying the importance of these issues, but at the same time, how to encourage the informal sector workers to operate their own businesses, so that there is not much harassment from the government, there is not much harassment from the police, and they should be in a position to operate their business smoothly, and they don't have to share their incomes with other rent seekers. Thank you very much.
Balwant sir, you are on mute.
Thank you, sir, for a enlightening lecture, and it's really, you have covered all kind of, issues which, we are currently thinking about, and we also, the most important part is the migration to rural to urban migration, which you always think is, is linked to the poverty, because that is one of the issues which really, very insightful. And the other thing, what you suggest, like how this informal sector, low productive and high productive formal sector, and informal to formal sector, how they are linkages, because we have also done the similar kind of studies where we have seen the informal the formal manufacturing units, they also linked with the informal, because most of their work is done by through contact with the smaller or informal enterprises, and that is also dominate in Indian economy. So they are also even so both are linked together. And the third point which you have raised is there is a need of anti-poverty programs in a similar way in a rural area, even in urban spaces also. And there are a lot of other issues which are really the unemployment, disguised unemployment. So this is reality at present. Obviously, in the long run, we have to think about the rural industrialization that is that our government, our policymakers are thinking about the last 70 years, but still that is it's not possible. But this is the opportune time, I think, because of huge reverse migration and other the skill level available. So these are the things which really I think value to the expert, value to the policy makers. I think if we'll really implement these kind of things in the coming days, or in the after this pandemic will be over, or we don't know the time, but I think these are the future policy implications, which is very much. Now I would request Professor Bharat Singh to I think raise some issues, or also you can ask Professor Mitra regarding some of your concern and all other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Balwant ji. Sir, your camera is off. Thank you very much, Balwant ji, and my warm greetings to all the participants. And some of my students are also part of this webinar. They are also watching it. I have a couple of queries, rather questions from Professor Mitra. One is that you mentioned about the percentage of migration as proportion of rural population, and the other may be the percentage of migrants as proportion of city population and urban population. I would like to know the precise distinction between these three terms and what are its implications for the employment generation, employment opportunity, both in the rural areas and the urban areas. Secondly, there has been a rise in the population of students, and we have always been anxious about improving the quality of employment, not only the total volume of employment, but its quality also in terms of the income and sustainability of the income that they earn. My question is, on behalf of the students, that how do you see this phenomena that for the time being there is decline in the total workforce of the economy in the light of increasing the size of the student population. Is this phenomena a ray of hope, a silver lining in the direction of improving the quality of employment for future India? These are the two questions that I would like to
Thank you very
get
much.
answer from you.
Actually, how do we look at migration? If you look at migration as a percentage, those who, let's say, those who have migrated in last 10 years, as a percentage of rural population, then you would find that it's a very, very small percentage. And then you will have the tendency to conclude, oh, rural to urban migration rate is extremely nominal. Why are you worried about this? Why are you saying that migration is huge? Now, if you take the migration flow, the migrants as a percentage of urban population, then it's a little better. Again, it is less than 10%. On an average, it is about 10% at the all India level, and it would vary across states. In some of these states, it's as nominal as 5%, 7%, etc. Again, people would have a temptation to conclude that these rates are very, very modest. Why are you so much worried about the migration phenomenon? So what we are saying that let us recalculate. We understand that the migrants are not migrating to the entire urban space. They are going to the large cities. So let us calculate the migration rate as a percentage of city population, where actually they are arriving, and not the notional migration that we should be talking about. So if you work out the actual migration from the rural to the city space, then you would find that it is phenomenal. That more than 1/3 or almost half of the 40%, 45% of the total decadal growth can then be attributed to the migration flow. So, as you have seen that over the years, it is not just the low-income households who are migrating to the urban space. Also, there are a lot of students, there are a lot of employment seekers at higher levels are also migrating. So we have to keep in mind that the migration is a significant phenomenon, and we have to do appropriate planning for their housing, for their jobs, etc. That is the point that I was trying to highlight. That if we calculate the migration rate right at the beginning in the most appropriate way, then only we will be able to provide proper inputs for policy making. Secondly, when you say that the quality of employment and the quantum of employment, keeping in view the student population, keeping in view the educated population, yes, the quantum of employment is shrinking, and it's a major worry. The private investment is not at all coming up. In fact, now the government is debating in what way the effective demand can be enhanced. You decompose the effective demand in terms of consumption demand, in terms of your investment demand, and in terms of government expenditure. It is only the government demand that is rising. The investment demand or the consumption demand, they are not at all picking up. So it definitely in next 1 or 2 years, we are going to face a major gloom in the job market. So the quantum of employment opportunities will be declining, and many of the corporate sectors, they have almost stopped their placement centers. And even if they are recruiting, very few are being recruited. So that's a point to worry about. And the quality of employment. Now, given this situation, how long people can afford unemployment? Even if they are educated, and even if their parents, let's say, are able to suffice for some time and they can look for jobs, but eventually the component of self-respect is so much high that they will have to look for job opportunities. And I can see that some of the people who are actually eligible for lecturer's position or to work in the corporate sector, now they are sending their biodata to get recruited as field investigators. You know, the field investigator's job is much, much inferior to the proper researcher job. And I can see that there is a compromise at that front. And that compromise is being faced by all sections of the population.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Balwant sir, your mic again is mute.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I'll request Dr. Manorama Bakshi to please raise
Professor
your
Mitra,
questions. Yeah.
can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Professor Mitra, thank you so much for this insights and this presentation. My question to you is, as you know, like pre-COVID times, women labor workforce participation had already declined a lot.
Yeah.
So how do you see the current scenario will, number one, impact the women, labor participation?
That's true. That's true.
Number second is what you rightly said, like village industrialization that we need to now look into, like, and which our Prime Minister also said that he's looking for localization, and he's looking for, that is why he introduced the latest scheme that was like Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan, wherein almost 50,000 crore rupees, I mean, India, we are going to invest. My question is, do we have that kind of options and that kind of systems and infrastructure ready at the village level that we can initiate this kind of Rozgar?
Okay.
These are the two questions. One is about female labor workforce participation, and second is about Garib Kalyan Yojana.
Thank you very much for your questions. Yes, as you know, the women workforce participation rate has been declining even before the COVID had taken place. And that has created a major worry among all of us. Why do women participate in the labor market? Now, one, we are able to see that in some of the states, particularly in the rural areas, women could participate in the labor market significantly when they are being pushed into the labor market. So what we call as poverty-induced participation. The household is below the poverty line, so all the members have to participate in the labor market, and therefore they had participated. Now, as the income of the household rises, particularly what we call as rise in the spouse's income, then women are forced to withdraw from the labor market. And that is the reason why in the urban context, we get to see the tragedy of the urban middle class. So many women are highly educated or at least graduates, yet their labor force participation rate is extremely low. So there is the stigmatization of participation in the labor market. It is still very much prevalent that the household chores and managing the household responsibilities are sort of taken as a primary responsibility of the women members. And so gender sensitization, etc., are very much important. Also, we have shown through our research that women labor force participation rate can be encouraged if flexible working hours and several other infrastructural facilities, starting from creche to all other kinds of support, is provided. So this flexible working hours provision and working from home, these are some of the important mechanisms which can actually encourage women to participate in the labor market. And that would also help them to sort of overcome the stigmatization that is associated with the participation in the labor market. In the rural context, yes, the rural industrialization, as I was mentioning, is a very important strategy. But for that, and we expect that rural industrialization will help people to overcome some of the cultural practices, and it will encourage people of both the sexes to participate in the labor market. However, as you have mentioned very rightly, the infrastructural support in the rural context is extremely nominal. You do not have adequate power supply, continuous power supply. You do not have adequate roads. So when we are talking about rural industrialization in the remote areas, first we have to envisage it in terms of creating infrastructure. So without that, obviously, rural industrialization is not going to be a successful strategy. So though the private investors are willing to go to the remote rural areas and invest, but I'm not sure that it is actually being implemented. And that is primarily due to the lack of rural infrastructure. I think it's high time now the government will have to provide a lot of focus on creating the infrastructure. You may have seen the work of John Reyes and Geeta Gandhi Kingdon, where they have shown that how the provision of infrastructure could raise the women enrollment in the schools. So And then we had extended that analysis, and we had shown that how it can also contribute to the creation of job opportunities for women, and women will also be able to access those opportunities.
Thank you so much, Professor Mitra. One more question I would like to, if I have the time, if you can answer. One thing is, I'm a bit worried, like India has recently initiated some time back, where it initiated like, community-based tourism, where in these small time, like, in Himachal side and Northeast side, people used to give in their houses, like Nagaland and all that, wherein they could earn some kind of money based on tourism kind of activities.
Right.
But now that is also, tourism is the hardest hit kind of a sector.
Absolutely.
So what is your opinion like going forward? Like can we initiate at least within internal kind of internalize the tourism kind of a thing, or maybe religious tourism?
Absolutely.
How do you see it like going forward?
Yes, it's very important. As you mentioned rightly, the international tourism in the present context, or at least in next 1 year, I really do not see much hope about it, unless the vaccine comes out. Even if vaccine comes out, it will take a long time to reach the commoners. So I think it is very important to encourage people to travel on religious tours, and the internal tourism is very important. Somehow the tourism in the middle class families is not a very significant phenomenon in the Indian context. As you get to see in the Western world, that people save throughout the year to go out during the holidays, even within their country. That has not been a very significant phenomenon. Just maybe religious tours is very important, but not really going for sightseeing or to enjoy the natural beauty. So I think that is very important in the present context to encourage, and so that people from different states can travel, particularly to the states where you do not have infrastructural support to create rural industrialization overnight, or you do not have enough avenues to provide livelihood opportunities. I think it's important that with social distancing, how travel can be encouraged so that at least some people can get back their livelihood opportunities.
Thank you, Professor Mitra. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Again, now I'll invite Dr. Reena to raise some questions or some comments. Dr. Reena. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, please.
Good evening, sir. Sir, I am very much happy to listen to you, sir. First of all, I am also very happy to see that you have connected everything related to COVID-19 and its impact on different sector. That is very praiseworthy. You have also suggested that where we can manage and observe the labor, that was informal, rural non-farm sector, and agro-based industry is one of them, where we can engage and observe our labor. My question is related to domestic workers, right? Especially women who are working in houses, and they are very poor. So COVID-19 has affected very much on them, and their livelihood has very much disturbed. So what we can do for them? And the second question is, we know that millions of laborers have come back to their home, and they were working in very skilled enterprise, and we know that they are skilled, and when they come back to their home, they are facing serious problems at their local market, and they are making some sort of competition with their local workers. So can we give some suggestion for them and some other type of jobs, so that we can engage them and reduce the competition?
Yes, absolutely. I think the domestic workers are very much hard hit. Some of them had left during particularly those who work in the urban space and reside in slums. They had all left the city, and then they had gone back to the rural areas. Now they are not many of them are not in a position to come back. And even when they come back, there is a hardship because of the restrictions, because of the mobility restrictions, they are not able to get back those jobs in which they were engaged earlier. And so I think it is, we have to now sort of awaken our conscience that we have to pay them more. So that maybe they were earlier, they were doing 6 jobs and they were able to manage the subsistence level of income. Now they are able to get back only 2 jobs. So what do we do for them? So those 2 households must think about that, and then they must try to raise the pays. So that is one way of coping up with the mechanism. So sharing the burden, that the middle class households are perhaps least affected because they are in salaried jobs, they are able to work from home. The gig economy is getting momentum, and so they are not so much affected in that sense as far as the income is concerned. So let us try to share the burden of those who are located at the lower echelons of the socioeconomic ladder. So that is how perhaps we can cope up with the strategies jointly. And the other point is that many skilled workers have gone back to the rural space and they are getting absorbed in petty activities. They are competing with other members of the household, with their neighbors for small jobs. And as a result, what is happening, the market wage is declining further because of this competition. So it is very important that something should be done immediately in the rural context. As you know, the rural industrialization will not pick up overnight. As Madam said, that without infrastructure, it is not possible to have rural industrialization. So in the short run, what can be done? In what way, the rural, say for example, the NREGA program you have already in motion, how to expand its scope, how to raise the number of days per household, so that it can become a gainful activity and it can be sustained over a long time. So instead of having those 100 days, okay, let us say that it can be expanded. If the government is able to allocate more funds towards some of these programs, I think it can work as a stopgap arrangement. The public distribution programs, the public works programs. And this NREGA program should not be sort of single-handedly pursued. You should try to include many such programs at a time, so that it can create rural infrastructure. It can also create it can strengthen the irrigation system. It can also help the cropping pattern. It can also contribute to other non-farm activities in the rural space. Say, for example, that women can join hands and they can form a cooperative, and they can, with government support in terms of credit and marketing assistance, they will be able to sell their products at a faraway market rather than selling them in the local market and getting no profit at all. So I think it is important now to think of multiple strategies, not just a single strategy of NREGA. Rather, one should have a bunch of strategies which should be pursued simultaneously, and more space should be provided to each of these households, rural households.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And last, I will request Dr. Arjun. Hello.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, sir, for such a giving such a wonderful talk, and really talking upon the spatial dimensions of the issue, also migration, but also touching upon the conundrum which the urban sector growth has led. Many of our professor, I also did my PhD from CSRD JNU, and there what the inner urban areas growth in terms of population has been declining. That is also a phenomena. And given that we also have this exclusionary urbanization, which sir, you have also raised. Having said that, sir, you have also mentioned that in terms of agglomeration economics and concentration, that there has been economies of scale and networking and other effects do work. And migration to these big cities, as we have also seen the return of migrants, that is the case. In that term, sir, you have also highlighted that started your lecture by Lewis, Todaro, and other models. looking into those. So do you think in urban informal market also, uh, the similar thing has been done, as you also highlighted that now those who have PhD are applying for, you know, a pure job. So do you think here also similar type of thing has happened? What has happened to our farm sector? More people are there, and if more people are there, why they are not coming into the unemployed labor force? We have this workforce which is stagnant at around some estimates is 45 crore, some 48 crore, 50 crores, and we have this huge, as Professor Bharat Singh also mentioned, that every year we have at least 6 million to 10 million new entrants. So where are those going? Are we not capturing those? Why is our unemployment rate not ballooning? Now we have 6-7%. A few years back we had 2-3%. Other than that, sir, I have this another question pertaining to policy. That in Narega, the budget has been revised again. As sir you mentioned, the government has increased also under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan package. Manorama also mentioned. Uh, Other than that, we have this Atmanirbhar package of 21 lakh crores, almost 10% of the GDP. Despite having that, in Q2, the you know our the dip is almost 1/4. So, do you think that these policies are working, or what should be done to stimulate the aggregate demand in this near and short term for this year, and how to go ahead so that lives of the peoples are impacted? Thank you, sir.
Yes, I'm not too sure if I could actually hear you properly because there was a lot of instability in the internet on my side. Nevertheless, see, we do agree that there is a lot of fluctuations in the demand, and the demand has decelerated so much that the government is finding tremendous difficulty to raise the effective demand. So for that, I think it is very important that how people get enough income in their hands to generate effective demand. What are the mechanisms? Of course, you cannot distribute money. That is not going to be long lasting. It can be a of transitory help, but it can't be sustained for long. So how to take advantage of this situation and build the infrastructure? Let us say employment strategy and building infrastructure strategy, both can be combined so that you are actually getting some work done and you are making the payment. And the construction is one such activity which can actually contribute to employment creation in a significant manner, both in the rural and the urban areas. And that is one way how you will have something being created, some asset is being created, and at the same time, it will create livelihood opportunities. And that is how the income then can be transferred to the hands of the workers and the effective demand can be generated. The other point that you were mentioning is that the people are actually compromising with their quality of employment. And it is happening at every level. So the on-the-job training, this is another important strategy that the government can actually do at the moment. That try to let us retrain our workers, try to provide skills to the unskilled and semi-skilled workers. So they would also find some kind of engagement, and also you will have the trainers who can be gainfully employed. And you provide some kind of stipend to the participants so that the trainees also get some kind of employment, indirect employment benefits. And at the same time, the trainers will also get some preoccupations. I think this is how it can start. And I'm hopeful that that in 1 year's time, we should be able to then again recoup with some of these shortfalls that we have already undergone.
Thank you, sir. One just last addition that we have also announced in the last budget that we have this program called National Infrastructure Pipeline to the tune of investment of 103 lakh crores, almost 1 crore, and we have almost more than 7,000 projects under that, and that has been stalled. I totally agree that infrastructure creation, also the agricultural fund of more than 1 lakh crore, this has been highlighted. But so what kind of projects in your view should be initiated? This idea of reskilling and engaging, I find it a very, very effective solution by you. Thank you, sir. But in terms of infrastructure, what could be, the focus? We have 8,000, many of those get into environment, land, other issues, big infrastructure projects. But yes,
it has to be it has to be of very different nature as we move from the rural to the urban space. In the rural context, when we are using this term creation of infrastructure, it has a very different objective. That you have the irrigation infrastructure, you have the building of houses, you have like your residential houses can be rebuilt, and also creating certain roads and connectivity, etc. Now, when we are and also providing storehouses so that the people always the Indian farmers have been suffering from this problem of shortage of storehouses. So in what way such facilities can be provided? So this is the time which we in fact try to utilize to build those kinds of infrastructure, and so that in future the farmers will not have to pursue the distress sale kinds of things. They should be able to store them properly and then get the profits around the year. Now, in the urban context, when we are talking about infrastructure, it can again mean a variety of things. It can mean creating the large industries in the outskirts of the cities, in the census towns that I was mentioning, that they have been transformed into urban space, but they do not have infrastructure. They do not have the base for industrialization. So in what way larger industries can be encouraged in such space? And in very large million-plus cities, the corporate sector's contribution to value addition, how it can be encouraged, in what way more space can be created. Obviously, the city limits are fixed, so you will have to think of vertical growth. So in what way the vertical growth can be encouraged in cities like Delhi, where you have a lot of scope. And that can contribute to value addition, and that can contribute to livelihood creation.
Thank you, sir, and thank you. I think the time is almost more than one hour, and we have around we have scheduled it 45 minutes, and it's really insightful, and talking to you is, you can talk at length at any level, like so I thank you very much from our bottom of heart, because we have got so much insight from you, and I think we will also put a kind of newspaper article and even a policy brief out of your lecture, and we'll also before finalizing it, we'll also send to you. And thank you for your time, and thank you to Professor Bharat, Dr. Manorama ji, and Dr. Reena Kumari for obviously Dr. Arjun Kumar ji for a very short time, very short notice. We have requested them to come for the discussion, and they come out. And thank you very much for again. And in future again, we'll request you, and for sparing time for this kind of insightful talk, and we'll get a lot from you. And thanks again. Thank you very much. Thanks to all.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned, it's a great privilege and pleasure for me.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.